You're on.
Thank you, Keith, for coming in this morning. And you've had an illustrious career in public education, and you've also had some encounters with the infamous ECOT, the electronic classroom of tomorrow. And first of all, let's talk about your career as a school administrator.
I was an educator for 40 years. I was superintendent of Twin Valley Local School District in Preble County, Tuscarawas Valley School District in Tuscarawas County, Westlake School District in Cuyahoga County, Olentangy School District in Delaware County, and then my last one was at Newark City Schools in Licking County.
So you had experience in rural districts, in suburban districts,
City, wealthy,
city
poor,
districts.
all the above.
So you've seen it all.
Yeah.
And as an administrator, you know, when you went into your office every morning, you know, what was kind of on your mind in terms of the students? What was your concerns?
My concern was always that the students got the top quality education they could receive. And what I would tell my teachers is, I want to make sure that a child benefits for giving a day of their life from being in your classroom. And they should be better tomorrow than they were today.
So you assume kind of a fiduciary responsibility for each and every child.
Everyone.
And so if a child's missing from school, you want to know where that child is.
Absolutely. They can't get an education if they aren't in school.
Great. Let's talk about your experience as the Newark superintendent.
Okay.
And specifically, I'd like for you to talk about the year 2006. And you had you just referenced the fact that some students weren't in school, and we were concerned, rightly so, about that. Can you talk about your general practice of having your truant officers visit the homes and check on the students that were not in attendance?
Absolutely. Newark City Schools is blessed to have had two fabulous attendance officers. Bobby Nash was the head of the attendance office, and Brooke Wolf was the assistant. Brooke had been trained as a police officer, and so she knew the law and practices, and they were both just very child-centered and wanted to make sure that children got a quality education. And so if a child had been absent several days, they would go out and make home visits to find out what was going on, why they were absent. And this was just routine practice for any student that was in Newark City Schools.
Okay. And this was conducted throughout the school year by both of the attendance officers?
By both of the attendance officers is a routine. That was their main responsibility, was to check the attendance and to see why Johnny or Susie didn't show up to school today if mom hadn't or dad hadn't called them in.
Right, great. In 2006, that was sort of a turning point because you learned something special about the students that were enrolled or supposedly enrolled in ECOT or online schools. And how did you learn that?
Bobby and Brooke came to me and said, Mr. Richards, we have a real serious concern. As we've made calls to go out to the homes of some of the students in Newark City Schools that aren't in attendance, in many cases, there was a sibling in the home that was enrolled in ECOT. And when they stopped to talk about Mary, who was a Newark City School student, Billy or Joe, that was an ECOT student, the mother would say, you know, it's been 2 years since we signed up for ECOT and they don't have a computer, they don't have online services. You know, what are we supposed to do? We've called and ECOT won't do anything. And so Bobby Nash and Brooke Wolf came to me and said, Keith, I think we got a problem here. And I said, it sounds like it, but let's not go by mom saying this. Let's see what we can get that is documented, that mom or Susie or Joe will put their hand on the Bible and say this is the way it is, and we can document and prove what it is. And so they spent probably about 3 months going around and checking to see what was happening as they made these other calls. on the homes.
Okay, great. And what was the nature of that documentation? Do you remember?
It was all paperwork.
Paperwork?
Yeah, and they wrote it down. I actually had a file that I wish I still had. I retired as superintendent of Newark in 2009. But fortunately, Brooke Wolf is still the attendance officer at Newark City Schools, and she still had her side of the paperwork.
But I want to be clear, the documentation for the ECOT students was exactly like the documentation for any student.
Oh, absolutely.
Any student that would have been truant or absent.
Oh, absolutely.
Without excuse.
Without excuse.
From
I mean,
the school.
Newark City Schools sponsored an online digital academy.
At the same time?
At the very same time. So this was clearly, and I said in the letter that I sent to the Attorney General's office and the Department of Education and to Sandy Fritsch from Lucas County Educational Service Center that sponsored ECOT, this was not an anti-charter school, community school program. We sponsored two. This was simply a fiduciary responsibility to see that children received a quality education for the money that was being spent.
Great. Well, you've mentioned the letter that you sent to the sponsor. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that for a moment. Given this situation where you had students that clearly were not receiving an education with ECOT, and according to your books, they had left the Newark City School District. Mm-hmm. Besides sending the letter to the sponsor, what else did you do at this point to try to resolve the situation and really, I guess your efforts were directed at getting these students that had not been in an educational program back in some educational program?
My primary purpose was to see that the boys and girls in ECOT got the educational services that the state of Ohio said they were supposed to receive for the money that was being deducted from Newark City Schools. I had no issue to start with about the money. Right. It was all about the children getting a quality education.
All right, well, describe for us then, besides the sponsor, who else did you contact and to try to get this taken care of or resolved? And what were the responses? Obviously you contacted the sponsor, you contacted other state agencies. What was the nature of that experience?
Frustrating was the nature of the experience, because I felt that I was yelling that the emperor has known who closed, and everybody was saying it doesn't matter. The Attorney General's office said it's out of our jurisdiction, we have no responsibility, you need to talk with ODE. And ODE said, well, you signed the form saying these students were actually Newark City School attending students originally, and so therefore the deduction's not incorrect. And I said, but it is incorrect if in fact the students aren't getting the education that they're required. And so they continuously threw back at me, you signed the form saying these were Newark City School students, we deducted it on that basis, and they refused to do anything about whether or not the children were getting a quality education or the services that the Ohio Revised Code required.
Great. You mentioned it wasn't about this originally in terms of money, but money is important to a school district like Newark City.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'd like for you to talk about the amount of money that was involved here, and what relationship would that have to the Newark City school budget, and what could Newark done if you would have gotten those students back and received the money back? What improvements or additions to the educational program in Newark City schools would have been possible?
It would have been a major benefit for Newark City schools. The 1 year of 2006, we documented that ECOT received, it was a deduct from the state, from Newark City schools by the state of Ohio and then sent to ECOT. It was over $423,000. I've gone back and checked with the treasurer at Newark City Schools, Jeff Anderson, that's there presently,